I thought I'd do this today in honor of National Poetry Month. Normally, at this time of the year, we'd be going over to Sanibel Island, and Joe Pacheco, Sanibel Joe, runs the a poetry reading every April in honor of National Poetry Month. But unfortunately, things are different this year, so we are going to do it ourselves. Uh, Anyhow, the other thing we do, oh my goodness, I'm getting all kinds of replies already. Thank you. Unfortunately, I can't read them, so I will have to look at this later. The reason I'm doing this is because obviously we're all sheltering in place. And I thought it would be a good idea to honor National Poetry Month, honor Joe Pacheco for what he does for National Poetry Month. And So, what we're going to do today is talk about uh, places and people that mean so much to us during this time. I'm going to be reading some poems about my family, my friends, my home, things that I enjoy doing that I can or can't do. So I hope you'll sit back, grab a beverage, grab a snack, and uh, and get ready to listen to some poetry. Like I said, I can't read your comments at the moment, but I will later on. After the poetry's over, I'm hoping you'll stay and I'll make sure that we do answer your questions about any of the poems or anything else you'd like. So let's start off. All right. The first and the last poem I'll read today has to do with my wife, Suzanne. She is the alpha and the omega of my life, and therefore it's fitting that the poems should reference her in the beginning and in the end. This October we'll be married for 50 years, and I'd like to start off with a poem that I wrote for her on our 20th wedding anniversary. It's called When I Said. When I said I do, I did, and so did you. Far beyond that hour, minute we knew, love was something that you do, like breathe and grow. You do it as two to make a life, some lives. You love until you die, and even then, the memory of you and me survives. The next poem has to do with my children, and when I was working, uh, obviously I spent all my time working, and I felt like I wasn't always there.
Sideways in the video.
I'm sideways in the video.
Says Brian.
Oh, how's that? Is that better? Okay, I think I'm back.
Text.
Hello, bro. Anyhow, now I can see who is saying things. Good, thank you. Welcome, Doc, Joanne, Dave. This next poem is about my children. It's called He Rushes. He rushes to leave work, 22, not a minute later. Seconds mean a missed train. He leaves a little work behind, a little guilt. He rushes to correct a lifetime of neglect. His sons, two in college, the youngest still home. He senses the emptiness, the silence. He was an okay dad, that's all. He rushes now to be more. When we were first married, we came home on our honeymoon, and I like to read, and I just started reading. And I looked up at one point, and there was Susie crying, and she was lonely. And so I wrote this poem. It's called "There Is Still Much Love." There is still much love in her tears as she sits in the corner of our living room, full with chairs of muted colors and a red rug on the floor. She has sat there all afternoon watching her man read, and she has only lately started to cry. She misses him so much. I have, as I said before, I'll be married for 50 years. And during that time, the most amazing thing since I've known Susie in college, she's hardly changed, whereas I've gone crazy changing. So I wrote this poem. It's called Here's to the Girl I Married. Here's to the girl I married. How you managed to stay just the same. You must have gotten dizzy watching me circle through change after change. But coming back again this time, your love, like gravity, has pulled me home. And willingly, lovingly, I fall back into your world. My chute open, I drift harmlessly into your arms. Like all marriages, we've had our ways up and down, and there was one couple of year really we hardly talked to each other, and then we gradually came back. We started playing gin again, which was something we liked doing. We started talking, and then finally got back to our old ways. And I wrote this poem about that. It's called In the End. In the end, it's the thing you marry for in the first place that holds it together. If it never existed, it never will. And if it did, you'll fall in love all over again each time it gratefully reappears. My brother and sister in law, Don and Fern Robillata, have two children, Matthew and Laura. And when Laura was 12, something happened to her that shouldn't happen to any 12-year-old or any woman at any age. She was out for a bike ride up near their summer home in the Adirondacks, and a man stopped, abducted her, took her into the woods, raped her, drove her away to a spot in the woods another further away, and raped and sodomized her, and choked her and left her for dead. Uh, Miraculously, she survived, and she was even able to remember 5 digits from his license plate, and they arrested him, convicted him. He's serving equivalent of life sentences now in prison. It's been 25 years. He's up for parole this year, unfortunately, but thanks to Fern's efforts, hundreds of people have written to the parole board uh, saying that this serial rapist and repeat offender should not be let go. So we're hoping to hear good news on that front. Laura was confirmed uh, on New Year's Day the following year, and I wrote this poem for her. It's called For Laura, for her confirmation. In a way, you have already been confirmed. In a private place and a private time, God reached down to touch you. In the cup of his protective hand, he brought you back to life and anointed you in his grace. And in that instant of making you strong, you became his guiding light, returned to shine among us, a sign of his eternal love. Many of you know James Robillata, my son, my youngest son, and he's been an inspiration for me for a long time. Uh, and this is the first poem I wrote about him. It's called The Wild Innocence of Youth. And it also speaks to what I was going through at that time, back in the 90s. The Wild Innocence of Youth. I'm rushing home to be with my son, ricocheting off a bad day. I crave his company, crave the wild innocence of youth. I am caught up in the 90s, lapse occasionally into business speak. Think in terms of profits. My own youth dims as recollection veers towards lore. I need the company of real youth, need to watch the smile of immortality on unblemished face, listen to his voice change, full of bravado and certainty. Many people have compared what we're going through to 9/11. Uh, and I guess in terms of death and what it's done to unite the country, I see the similarities. Of course, we can't get together to do memorials and celebrate baseball games, etc. But I thought I'd read this poem because it shows the resiliency of us. And it's called, I wrote this right after 9/11, it's called I Am the City. I am the city. You cannot knock me down. I have an attitude. You cannot keep me down. I am all the old remaining buildings, the crowds on 42nd Street, the theater, restaurants. I am a parade down Fifth Avenue, the stock market, Yankees. I am in your face, the mayor, the president of the US of A. I am the city. We have some really good friends who were neighbors of ours back in Sayville on Long Island, and they have moved to Venice. They've been there now a number of years. They were educators, and we just had a terrific friendship with them. We were invited to their retirement dinner, and I wrote this poem to celebrate them. It's called A Poem for Two Friends. I sit in bed this drizzly Sunday morning, reading from a book of poems. In the background, folk music and a DJ's voice muffled by the stairs and turns of our house. I have stayed home this morning to write a poem for two friends, a gift at their retirement dinner. I have thought all week about what to say. It always comes back to friendship, long before the love, each with a different spouse, each a separate tragedy. They were friends. Now their life is defined by their friendships. We will need a banquet hall to allow all of us to raise a toast, and even that will not be enough room for all those touched by their goodness. They taught the young, after all, each in their own way. They gave hope and advice and caring to generations. Some have come back to thank them. Many more, like me, have just become better people and friends by sharing in their laughter, their love for each other, and the simple kindness of their lives. I was honored to read a poem at each of my son's weddings. And our first wedding was my middle son, Brian, who married Erin Murray. And that was on March 19th, 2005. And this is the poem I read at their wedding. Today, the whole world knows what we, your parents, watched grow. From an accidental meeting at another wedding less than 4 years ago to today in this joyous celebration of your love. First the phone calls, then the visits to Brooklyn and Sayville. You started holding hands, but soon began taking care of each other. Your love growing into a fiercely protective union, two former strangers now partnering in life. Long before today, you understood the vows that a man and woman make to become a husband and wife. You have cared for each other in sickness, seen each other through in times of sadness. You give honor to each other in your words and deeds, and profess your love with each tender touch. Today is but the outward pledge. Your parents know this day began at another wedding less than 4 years ago. I wrote this poem a few days after that wedding, and Susie and I were just full of happiness, and I wanted to express it somehow. It's called Life Turning Over. The temperature climbed into the upper 40s today. The breeze reminds us that winter has only passed in calendar terms. The sunshine gives hints of springtime, lawns to be fertilized, grass green again, golf courses, cookouts return. Life turns over. It was but a few days ago we married off the first of our children. The warmth of that moment still fills us like the sun, brings us hope for the next generation, whose time has inexorably arrived. I also wrote what I call private poems for each of my boys, and it's not necessary that they shouldn't be shared. It's just that that's what I call them. Essentially, they're poems maybe that I didn't think were good enough to read at their wedding, or that I wanted to write after the fact. And this is uh, my private poem for Brian. For Brian on his wedding. I have tried for weeks to write a poem for your wedding day, imagining for you the words of love that will fill you on that special day. I have only known you as my son, watched you grow as part of my world, not your own. I have seen you with girls, then none, have watched you happy, then alone. But I have never seen you as a man, till now, with a woman at your side, watched with awe your fierce protectiveness, shielding someone else from all the world's faults. You were always strong for yourself. Now you are sure enough for two. And I am more proud of you now, for yourself and for the husband you'll become. I do not need to write words of love. I hear them in your voice and in the taking of her hand. This past March, we sold our house on Elm Street in Sayville. We had lived there for 37 years, raised our boys there, made numerous friends, and I'm going to read poems during the course of this reading about that house. As I was going through the poems to pick out what I wanted to read, I realized how many poems were either about the house or took place in the house. So this is the first one. It's called The Dining Room. In my dining room, the regulator clock we bought for our 5th anniversary tick-tock ticks behind me, transporting the room with its rhythm back in time. My wife has chosen a fruit on the vine pattern for the upper half of our wallpaper, separated from the chalk checkered pattern below by a cream molded chair rail. I write on an antique dining room table, part of a set inherited from an old friend of her mother's, gaze at the carved walnut pie chest purchased in a local store, now standing tall in the corner of the room. Above my head, a chandelier with 3 Murano glass shades remains unlit on a cloudy, cold day with rain, then snow expected by midnight. I am lost in this world of old and seemingly old. The room's warmth draws me in. I am writing again, and like the dining room, I have reconstructed my life so that it feels comfortable and provides me with a welcome home. My oldest son got married on November 12th in 2005, and this is the poem that I wrote for their wedding. The autumn leaves have turned their orange, red, and yellow hues. Now the winds blow night and day to shake them from their limbs. In this season of endings, we are filled with thoughts of new beginnings, no more so than the marriage of our firstborn son. Through the years, we watched him grow, making many friends, yet still alone. Then one day he said, "There's someone I'd like you to meet." And when we did, we understood. To see them together is to understand the mystery of love. That two people who once were strangers can meet, shed the unfulfilled portion of their lives, and make a couple who are now complete. Our youngest son said it best. Can you believe how happy Johnny is? Yes, we can. We've come to know Janan and watched the intertwining of their hands. Oh dear. I am having technical difficulties. There we go. All right. And this is Johnny's private poem. And Johnny, I apologize. I'm going to read the first stanza because I think it sets up the poem. And my apologies also to Jim Gustafson, who doesn't think I should do things like this when I write. But anyhow, this is the way the poem was originally written. It's called For Johnny on His Wedding. The middle of October, the first nor'easter of the season blows against the house. The sump pump relentlessly pushes the water out of our basement, the thumping of the pipe listened for in hope. I have come upstairs late in the day, away from the radio and phone conversation below. In the failing light, I sit in a small bedroom chair to write a poem for my son and wife to be. I am to read this poem, or perhaps failing another. I have less than a month to fulfill an obligation I willingly made to my future daughter-in-law. We have come to love her for who she is and how she makes our son happy. She has taken to my wife in a special way. They both understand hard work and white wine. I can see future conspiracies between them for work projects and riotous evenings. And she has completed the return of my son to me, rekindling the joy in his face, letting him love again unabashedly as he did a child. While I still miss his kisses, he has at last found lips worthy of that sweet softness. This is another poem about my house that kind of sums up how I feel about it. It's called Nooks and Crannies. I love my home, love to walk from room to room, each one its own shelter. We have lots of little rooms like nooks and crannies to hide things. Memories accumulate over the year tell a story of marriage, of children raised, friendships come and gone, moments in each room captured in a mind snapshot. There is a peace in this house. It has always been filled with love, laughter, and music. Like a comfortable shoe, I return from work, trips, the store, and feel at home at once and forever. My wife, Suzanne, is, as those of you who know her, an amazing human being. Uh, this poem combines one of the rooms in our house, which is the woman's room, where she went to get away from football and golf, and had a nice couch which she loved to read on. And she was always heavily involved with civic organization. She's a past president and board member of 3 organizations in our town, and still to this day, she's involved, and she will be as soon as we get home. This poem is called Her Couch. The house is quiet and the windows closed against the lingering coolness of spring. Passing cars hum in descending and ascending tones as they approach and leave the stop signs on our corner. In the sunroom, I sit on her couch. The sun warms my hands and the jeans that cover my legs. My wife will return shortly from another civic function. She has made a life for herself outside our home, full of giving and service to our town. Yet she loves our house, and that is her real sacrifice. She leaves it almost daily to attend meetings, participate in cleanups, or other worthwhile projects. She would love to be on this couch now, at this time of day, reading a newspaper or magazine, but she has been carefully taught the nature of service, of giving to others instead of herself. So I am left to enjoy her sunshine on her couch, writing my poems, which I convince myself will mean something to someone. And speaking of poems, this is a poem about writing poetry, called Lines of Thought. There is no sun this morning. Rain and heavy clouds darken the room. I put the book of poems down, open my notebook, let my pen fill the white pages with lines of thought. My sister-in-law, Fern, her mother was named Ann, and everybody called her Tanner. And when we moved from Michigan until Long Island, I moved to Long Island and started work, and Susie and the kids stayed back in Detroit. Well, Susie sold the house and did everything else to get us ready for the move. And Anne let me live upstairs in a spare bedroom at her house. And I wrote this poem for her. It's called For Tana. She took me into her home when I needed a place to stay, gave me a room and someone to talk to at night. We shared dinners and bowls of ice cream watching TV. I had no idea how famous she was or what her life had been like when young. I knew her as Tanner or Ann and later as Grammy, but I loved her for the goodness she showed me when she opened her home, then her heart when I needed them both. And I see Matthew is in the house, and how appropriate, Matthew. This is a poem that I wrote for Matthew and Erin for their wedding. And a little backstory. Fern and Don have a place in Schroon Lake now. They have a beautiful home that they've built. It overlooks the high peaks of the Adirondacks. And before that, Fern's family had a home down the road that wasn't on the water, had a big old porch on it that we used to spend all our time in. And when Matt went to propose to Erin, he took her down to the new home. They had just bought the land before they built the house, and there was a big rock on the water, and that's where he proposed to her. And when they got married in Schenectady, they get married on a river. The restaurant was on a river. So using the symbolism of the rock and the river, I wrote this poem for their wedding. It's called The Rock. It's for Erin and Matthew, July 3rd, 2008. We sat on the rock as the sun went down that memorable holiday weekend, and as the wake from an unseen boat lapped the shore, I took your hand, placed it in mine, and asked for the rest of your life. Today we stand on yet another shore, surrounded by family and friends. We have become the rock upon which life's wake will push against. Your hand still in mine, our love will create its own ripples throughout time. This is another poem about my wife. It's called The Recliner. This winter, I have finally taken to reading in my recliner, a fluorescent floor lamp illuminating the pages of my magazine or book. In the back room, my wife spends hours at her computer, toiling electronically for her various civic obligations. Many minutes of silence sliced open by the loud explosion of a one-sided phone conversation. Occasionally, I am summoned to undo some computer glitch or to forward an attachment. She calls out, "John?" The end stretched out in rising timber, turning my name into a question and a plea. We have grown close to Judy and John Abrams, and they have become our best friends. We see each other at least once a week, sometimes more. And I wrote this poem after we had gotten to know each other. It's called Someone Else to Grow Old With. It is a sunny morning in early February. I have read in bed for a while, tried sleep, but am drawn to write this poem. My wife sleeps beside me. A winter's cold has kept us from kisses 2 days now. We both miss these soft gestures of affection. I look forward to visit from my youngest son tonight. He comes just to say goodbye before we leave for our annual trip south. Tomorrow night, dinner with friends we have grown close to over the past year. Impromptu parties at each other's homes, sharing laughs, music, and contemporary conversations. They have made my life new again, giving me hope and pleasure through their company. And like my wife, someone else to grow old with. This is a poem about another spot in my house that I wrote a poem one day. It's called A New Space to Write. I have found a new space at home to write, upstairs in the boys' room. A small desk, mostly covered by a Ren and Stimpy puzzle. Pictures of my wife's father lean on the desk and wall. A small cube of pictures when our family was young on the left corner of the desk. A row of paperbacks, children's books, and a very out of place Moby Dick stood up by two heavy bookends, a boy in a sailor's costume and his dog. I have resurrected a portable heater from the basement, whose whereabouts I am, as usual, indebted to my wife. It is now a warm and comfortable space, and so far, a good place to write poetry. I met my wife in college. I went to Canisius, she went to D'Youville. And actually, I started going out with her girlfriend first. And then we broke up, and Susie, who living in Queens, invited me to come and go out drinking with her. And that's how we started to know each other and gradually fell in love. But her girlfriend's name was Anne. And a couple of years ago, her son was a Marine pilot and a helicopter pilot, and he died in a crash in the Pacific. And I just wrote this small poem thinking about her. It's called For Anne. I did not know your son, but having loved you once, I feel the pain of loss as if one of my own had gone down in that deep Pacific blue. We have four grandchildren, and the youngest one is Aiden, and he's the one we got to know probably best when they were young because his mom had to stay in the hospital for a few days, and we took care of him. And I wrote this poem about that experience. Aiden. We have four grandchildren so far, but due to circumstances have come to know the last one well. He is the only one I have cradled in my arms for hours, fed, changed, and rocked to sleep. Since his mother has been in the hospital, we have watched him gain weight and learn to smile. We call him Squeaky for his little cry. Barely a month old, we look forward to many more memories as we watch Aiden grow. Back at the house, we had this beautiful blue spruce. It towered above the house. And one day when I was in Florida, I got a phone call that it had blown down. And then I got another phone call and another phone call. So I wrote this poem about that. It's called The Blue Spruce. We were away when the big blue spruce fell in our backyard, miraculously missing the house and beech tree. My son called with the news, later sent pictures. Another son had been to the house that day, told me what the wind was doing. A third son sent an email, a picture of the tree before its demise rising above the roof of the house. Though we were separated by thousands of miles, the death of this beautiful tree brought us all together with memories of lost wiffle balls and birds nesting, heard but never seen. No more will the grandchildren run in the backyard, hidden from view by the width of its boughs. They will grow up and probably never remember it, but we will every time we look out and see the neighbor's house. My friend Judy lost her daughter in an accident tragically many years ago, and we were at her house celebrating my birthday, which was going to be the next day, and it turns out it was her daughter's birthday that day, and I wrote this poem for her. It's called For Lori. Tomorrow is my birthday, but my thoughts today are with a friend who lost her daughter several years ago. Today would have been her birthday. I didn't know Laurie, but knowing her mother, she must have been beautiful, smart, funny, listened to music, danced to music, had many friends, and been close to her family. The apple couldn't have fallen very far from that wonderful tree. Those of you who know me may know that I occasionally play golf, and I've written a couple of poems about golf. This is the first one. It's called A Nagging Back. It is well into May, and a nagging back has prevented me from playing golf. I love to be out on the course, shaping shots, chipping and sinking meaningful putts, or even playing my normal game, missing greens and failing to get up and down. In the end, I miss the trying, the stunning views on the back nine, but most of all, being with friends. This is another poem about Sayville. And it happened when I was sitting on my back porch and viewing the scene in front of me. It's called The Aphids. May is my favorite month in Sayville. Everything is in bloom and the warmth has finally returned. I'm sitting on the back stoop listening to the wind. It comes in great gusts and sweeps through the new leaves of the giant beech that is gradually taking over our yard. The aphids are back, which means I must soon spray the great tree, grown finally past the outer limits of the hose's reach. But not today. The wind is too strong, and I will need every inch of the water's arc to win this year's battle. This poem is about writing poetry, and it kind of sums up. I've always liked Poe's definition of poetry as the lyrical creation of beauty, and this poem touches on that. It's called Words. I like to curl words over my tongue, arrange them in lyrical order, each syllable a note, each line a melody, then fill the page with them, flesh thoughts that never existed but for conjuring. This is the only poem I'm going to read today that's about our Florida residents, uh, but it could be true. It's true now in this pandemic, and it was true back then. And it's called In the Morning. In the morning, getting my coffee, I look out at the lake. Most mornings, the water calm, holding its breath, sun already shining. Some days cloudy, with wind rippling across the surface. Even days of fog, opaque, obscuring the homes across the way. Precious are these days of new beginnings. This is the poem I wrote and for Susie on our wedding day. It's called I Have Danced. I have danced through the streets of my bliss, tripping on the smile of your love, rushing through the joy of your vision, crashing towards the ecstasy of your kiss. And I have lived my whole life in the dream of this moment, love sealed and forever. The sky applauds in the bursting of clouds, sunshine drapes the trees in a garment of joy. The next poem is about my brother Don, or Doc, as he's also known. And we have become really close, really good friends over the course of the last many years. And I wanted to write a poem for him. It's called My Brother. Until your teens, you were like background music in my life, part of the gang led by Ronnie and me. But when you painted your bedroom walls black, hung psychedelic posters, you became yourself. I watched you grow into manhood, nursing school, love, family, a career distinguished far beyond your youthful wanderings. And the friend you have been, visits to college, best man, nights in our first home, trips to Syracuse, Detroit, Jersey, days and days in Schroon Lake, now Florida. You have become my other companion in life, my other best friend. You have always given and still do. Love you, bro. This is a poem about a poet and poets in general. It's called Does It Know? A beam from a lighthouse saves a lost ship. A song on a radio comforts an old man. An image from a documentary changes a life. A poet sings into silence, illuminates, stirs a memory, pricks a conscience. Don't you miss baseball? It's springtime. There should be baseball. And we've been watching our grandsons in Little League for the last couple of years. And I decided to write this poem. It's called The American Pastime. The first years of hardball are the most hilarious. The loopy kids drawn like metal shavings to the magnet of a ground ball. The one kid who stands there game after game with the bat on his shoulder. The throws on a chance catch that leaves the hand in a trajectory and direction thought unimaginable. The infielder who waits for a pitched ball by turning in circles, oblivious to the play at the plate. And finally, the parents and grandparents who endure 2 hours of this twice a week, shouting encouragement or imploring attention. A rite of spring, a rite of passage, a painful recobbling of the American pastime. This poem combines poetry and my wife. It's called Worthy. The empty page beckons. Fill me this morning with something worthy. My wife, sleeping finally through the start of another cold, kisses now stolen on healthy days, carnival prizes rigged for missing. Some days are worthy only of poems. We have another group of friends that we've gotten close to that we get together for dinners a couple of times a year. And unfortunately, we lost one of them this year. I miss you, Bob. And I wrote this poem after one of the meals that we had. It's called Another Meal. 10 of us sitting at the leaved out dining room table, friends, neighbors, all of our group miraculously convened. Different conversations next to or across the table occasionally converge. Having grown old together, body parts replaced, cancer survived, who knows when or if all of us will share another meal. But nights like this, full of stories and laughter, seem to go on forever. Here's another golf poem. It's called The Siren. The siren, golf, calls, and off I go. Once again walk fairways, try to make shots, sink putts. Consumed in a quest for ever lower scores, I tinker with swing, change putting strokes. Still, a game gone bad. Less distance off the tee, errant iron shots, putts left short. Golf like life, aging. Unable to accomplish feats of youth, but stubbornly trying, hanging on to hope. And this poem is for my grandchildren. And the inspiration was a day we spent at the beach on Fire Island, where my son Brian and his wife are on vacation most every summer. It's called The Innocents. 4 grandchildren, Meyer and Anya, Thomas and Aidan, play in the surf. A Fire Island afternoon. Screams, giggles, look of surprise, rogue waves knocked them down. Aiden, the youngest, gives up after a while, content to play in the sand, a safe distance from shore. The rest continue to frolic, venture further out till waves force them back. These three adventurers, all about 8, still innocent, content to jump or lie down as shorebreak rolls relentlessly under and over each in turn. Watched over by fathers, a few steps away, the sons we raised long ago were innocents themselves. And I wrote this poem for my sister-in-law Fern to thank her uh, for all the times up at Schoon Lake and in honor of her new home. It's called The Lake House. Morning at the lake house, coffee smells, occasional swish of cars below. Windows closed against the overnight chill keep natural sounds out, but leave the views. Across the road, water stretches to the opposite shore. In the distance, the high peaks of the Adirondacks. A lone fisherman in his boat casts a line, a ripple in the new North Country day. By the way, that's the view from our bedroom when we go up there. It is magnificent. This next poem was written after a late night trip to the bathroom back in Sayville. When the moon is full, it just floods the whole house with light. You don't even need to turn on the lights. And I wrote this poem. It's called Full Moon Light. Shells on the bathroom sill cast hard, dark shadows from full moon's light. The room illuminated like a prison yard, a painting in black and white, but for interrupted sleep would have passed unseen into the night. One of the reasons we sold the house is because it's 2 stories and a basement, and the laundry's in the basement. And as we aged, it was just getting to be too much. And I wrote this poem from my wife. It's called Resolve. You rise from bed, walk across the room, a determined gait with a hint of limp. Plow into your day, dirty clothes from hamper to basket, then one step at a time, 2 flights to the basement. It was drudgery before you hurt your knee. Now the pain, the weight of years, must be folded into your resolve. This remains my favorite poem. And it's about writing poetry. It's about my house. Uh, it's about partially my wife. And uh, I wrote this poem. There's a thing called Poetry Soup that my friend Jim Gustafson told me about. And you can paste your poems into it and it'll count the number of syllables. And what it does is it helps you organize the poem and forces you to, to rearrange words and syllables and stuff like that. So this poem was done after I'd written. I did that and then revised it doing that, and I just love the way it came out. It's called Sunday Morning. Sunday morning, sitting in bed, reading, writing poetry, cup of coffee sharing the nightstand with a stack of unfinished books. You lie sleeping still beside me, the gentle rhythm of your soft breathing interspersed with silence. The two of us cooled by the breeze, lifting the curtains outward, then slowly drifting back to the sill. Uneventful moments in an uneventful life, at least for me. Retired, my only job now, to witness and document what remains of drowsy summer days before the fall. Speaking of the fall, but in a different definition of it, the third and final golf poem. It's called The Fall. Emerging from the sand trap, disgusted with the shot played, You trip over the tossed rake, legs twisting on the way down, waiting for the snap of bone or displacement of joint. You don't think about your head, which takes the full brunt of the fall, your forehead slamming into the ground, your neck snapping backward. You scream, then nothing. Silence. You are alive, not seriously injured. You will have a bump and a sore neck, but the could have beens are gone, and you are left only with the blame. Every October, I go down to our house in Florida and leave Susie behind to attend to her civic duties. And I love it because I play a lot of golf. But I miss her terribly. We miss each other. And this is about what happened on a plane ride on my way down one year. It's called Somewhere in Time. On a plane, the lady in the next seat watching Somewhere in Time. I am flying away from the woman I love, a temporary parting, but watching this movie, one of our favorites, I am with her still, transcending time and distance. And Stacy, I know you're in the house, so I'm going to read a poem about your cat. I don't know, what is this? Hatchie, maybe? Anyhow, it's called The Dangerous Cat. He senses my fear, stalks behind the couch, our little Serengeti. I reach for the Fritos, arm extended, guard momentarily down. He sees the sweater, knows which thread his claws will tear. I wrote this poem a couple of years ago after we got back from Florida, and it's called J'accuse. A single robin feeds on the broad expanse of my backyard, questions whether enough has been done to ensure the health of my lawn. His solitary presence a rebuke to the owner's indolence. Returned from the south a week, no seed or fertilizer applied. I blame the cold that racks my chest, renders me to my robe. A similar cold has not prevented my wife from her community chores. She travels across town to attend meetings, listens to talks. I sit at the table, view my red-breasted accuser, and think of a poem. My son James comes down to visit me, usually in the fall and sometimes later on in the spring. But he comes down when he can in the fall. We play golf, we talk, we eat. And I wrote this poem about one of his visits. It's called The Visit. I have been alone in Florida this fall, savoring the warmth of October and November. My youngest son will visit soon, spend a few days crammed with conversation. I love the whirlwind of him, can match his energy for a short stay. He has a counseling degree, works as a personal coach. I parry probing questions about my writing or lack thereof, his brothers and their wives, the new woman in his life, if I miss my wife. Being with him is analysis. I learn about myself, the introspection that follows. Never completely open in my responses. I am, after all, his father. I've mentioned already many times what a wonderful woman my wife is. Not only is she great civically, she's the rock of our family, and her brothers and sister-in-law, uh, and all the cousins. Uh, Tragically, her brother died a few years ago, and he had a home up on the St. Lawrence, which is her family home, and we all went up for the funeral, and she wanted everybody up there to not only honor Tom, but to understand what it meant to be from Ogdensburg and how important the St. Lawrence River was. And I wrote this poem about that experience. It's called St. Lawrence River. I sit on the deck of a rental house overlooking the St. Lawrence River, the sun hours from sunset, yet low enough to reflect off the water, warms my legs beneath the picnic table. On the lawn closer to the water, my wife, her brother, and sister-in-law sit in a semicircle on camp chairs. Their conversation, interspersed with laughter, speaks to the history of place. When they were young, their parents, aunts, and uncles would be the ones in raucous conversation. Summer vacations spent on river camps, rented from relatives. We have come to this river to bury my wife's younger brother. Years before, he had returned to the home of his parents, his own house on the river. Now my wife had wanted the cousins, hers and her siblings' children, and their children, to come for the service, to honor this generous man, but also to experience the river, to swim in its waters as had their parents and grandparents, to understand their family's history, their place within this history. Beyond that, she secretly hoped that the cousins' children would come to know one another, that this place would be important, a shared family's home. In the end, she got her wish. That Saturday, parents, children, children's children swam in the river. Later, a cookout and bonfire, with conversation and laughter. A couple of years ago, my wife fell and broke her shoulder. And a testimony to her strength. It was 2 weeks between when she broke her shoulder and she finally had the operation to replace it, and she couldn't get up and down the stairs, and her most comfortable sleeping position was on her recliner downstairs. And I wrote that poem about that experience. It's called Pillow Talk. At night, I climb the lonely stairs to my bedroom. At the turn of the stairs, a window. Over my neighbor's house, purple sky, with gray, thick clouds doomed to fill with snow as winter grooms. Down the hall in my bedroom, a single pillow, off center at the head of a queen-sized bed. The other on a recliner in our living room, propped under the arm of my wife, who recovers from surgery. Upstairs, I crawl into bed, lie off center, like my pillow lost without its mate. One of the highlights of my life was going to St. Andrews and playing the old course with my three sons. And we rented an Airbnb in St. Andrews, thanks to my son James. And I wrote this poem about us sitting around the night after we played. It's called St. Andrews. Evening in the living room of an Airbnb in St. Andrews. On one couch, my three grown sons. On the other, my wife and youngest son's fiance. The men have come to play the old course, the women for sightseeing, and because they love the men. Yesterday, my wife cried as we readied to play our round. She knew how much this moment meant to her husband and her boys. Tonight, her eyes fill again, watching them across the room, relaxed, laughing, comfortable in each other's company, brothers, different yet complemented by years of sharing the home she made for them. Laura, I think you're in the house. I think I've seen posts by you. This is the poem I wrote for you and Adam on your wedding. And it's called For Laura and Adam, August 3rd, 2018. Come, love, to my favorite place in the mountains, the Rockies of your youth. See the lake below that reminds me of my own Adirondack childhood home. both of us imprinted with a history of place and the support of family. Let us share the laughter we grew up with, the laughter that first drew us together, laughter that overcomes the perils of a winter road, that turns a friendship into love and a shared life, that empowers us to build a home and from this day forward, a family of our own. My youngest son got married last, and this is the poem I wrote for him and Tina. They are both public speakers. They are both amazing human beings. Individually, they're exceptional. Together, they're unbelievable. This is for Tina and James, November 10th, 2018. Like all great stories, it begins once upon a time. Two special people meet, recognize instantly in each other themselves. Both caring, charismatic, funny, lost in each other's eyes. The world stops over and over in random meetings or orchestrated forays. Both have stories to write and stories to tell. Each enhances and encourages the other. With laughter and touch, they move through adventure and crisis, leaving smiles and wisdom in their wake. Today, they are joined formally to write future stories together and to create the next generation that will change the world with badass stories of their own. And this is the private poem I wrote for James. It's called Anywhere with You. There is a place in space and time, a place fortunate for those who find. Some stumble in, others search and search. But when love is truly found, the journey to it falls away, and only the present is left to enjoy, anywhere with you. As it was getting close to selling our home, I, I started to miss it terribly. And I started taking pictures of all the rooms at different times of day and just observing the house to keep in my memory. And I wrote this poem one afternoon. It's called Autumn. Breezes and cool temperatures push summer into memory. Afternoon sun, lower, earlier each day, bathes the house in yellow slanting. Shadows dance across furniture and windows as wind drives leaves down and sideways. Lately, I have woken on my recliner, greeted by this scene, refreshed yet troubled. The for sale sign out front numbers the days where season intersects with home, foreshadows someday a recollection. This poem is called The Back Nine. Dr. Wexler calls them early stage cataracts, blurs the vision in my right eye, symptom of old age, symbol for a life well turned onto the back nine. Future gradually misting like morning fog. As life is reviewed, regrets rise then fade. The totality is all, and in that reckoning a grudging pleasure. Time spent foolishly or with significance. In the end, I have loved, been loved, and left some poems behind. I'm going to end this poetry reading with a poem that I use to close all my readings. And it speaks to the way I feel about my life. I've been incredibly lucky. I have a wonderful family and good friends. And what I'm going to do after this is over is I'll stay online. If anybody has any questions or I can get a chance maybe catch up with some people, uh, just let me know. And I'll be here for a few more minutes. Poem is called A Poem for Myself. Already it is a good day. Sitting in bed with my coffee, I put the book of poems down and pick up the tablet to write. It is my 59th birthday, and I am feeling content. The woman I have loved for 38 years lies in bed beside me. My children, as of last night, were safe. The two oldest have found mates and are building lives for themselves. My youngest, getting ready for responsibility, is still guided by his dreams. Outside, the world spins out of control. War, famine, injustice. But in this room, at this hour, I know only peace. Thank you so much for joining me. Uh, I really appreciate it. And as I said, I'll stay on the line for a little while longer. The sound of one hand clapping, yeah. Bring them on camera? I don't know. Can I do that? Thanks, Boba. Thank you, Johnny. Thank you. Yeah, they're writing notes. Thank you, Brian. Love you too. Aaron, thank you. Cheers to my hey, Stace. Thanks, Matt. Thank you, Janam. Hey, Judy. Thanks. Thanks so much, Doc. Anyhow, I sorry for the technical difficulties. I have a feeling I didn't tape this thing the way I wanted to. So, uh, thanks, Doc. But hopefully I will. And if I did, what period of life did you write most poems? Wow. Later in life, if you will. I guess it started. Maybe we can chat live. How do we do that, Judy? Thanks, Laura. I started writing seriously when I moved to Sayville, and and Runaway Bay opened up, and I went out to. I got 5 minutes to read my poems. Thank you, Fern, and and I read out loud, and I found I had a voice, and then I started writing to that voice, and I write sporadically, unfortunately. Uh, that's a good idea. We'll do that maybe later. And thank you, Judy. uh, and then I got involved with the Poetry Alliance. My friend Jim Gustafson became my mentor, and I started going to the poetry group. And I started learning how to revise poems and how to tighten my poems. And Jim suggested I write every day. And I started doing that in 2015, and I wrote a ton of poems and learned how to revise them and tighten them up. And I've written intermittently since then. And that's how I've been writing.
Who's that from?
James.
You were some early poems that were great.
Thank you, dear. my biggest supporter is here. So anyhow, looks like it's been over an hour. I think I'm going to wrap it up. Thank you, Bubba, and thanks so much for joining me. And I've enjoyed it immensely. Take care now. I'll talk to you soon. Poems and cocktails. I thought I'd do this today in honor of National Poetry Month. Normally at this time of the year, we'd be going over to Sanibel Island, and Joe Pacheco, Sanibel Joe, runs the poetry reading every April in honor of National Poetry Month. But unfortunately, things are different this year, so we are going to do it ourselves. Anyhow, the other thing we do, oh my goodness, I'm getting all kinds of replies already. Thank you. Fortunately, I can't read them, so I will have to look at this later. The reason I'm doing this is because obviously we're all sheltering in place. And I thought it would be a good idea to honor National Poetry Month, honor Joe Pacheco for what he does for National Poetry Month. So what we're going to do today is talk about places and people that mean so much to us during this time. I'm going to be reading some poems about my family. Oh, no. I'm starting off, like Brian said, I'm on the side. I don't know why. It looked good to me, but then I could read everybody's stuff. Oh.
So that's audio tape, or?
I actually managed to save it to my camera roll.
Okay.
Which I don't imagine I can't share it, but
Maybe James could help you do that.
uh-huh. Why is it not?